My name is Robin Williamson, and I am a regulatory
This
officer.
meeting is now
I have been here since April of last year, and my role in the continuing competency program is I am responsible for oversight of the audit, which we will talk about a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay, for those of you who are on the call, a copy of the presentation is available under the event, under the title. You click the title and the handouts are there. So the first slide we're going to refer to this afternoon is the objectives. And today we're going to review the RN regulations and the CCP program requirements that are outlined in the regulations. So we'll learn about the legislative requirements for CCP. We're also going to review the CCP licensure renewal requirements for RNs and NPs, so what's required of an RN and NP. We're going to overview the CCP components, so how do you complete CCP, and I'm going to give you some examples as we go through. We're going to do an overview of the CCP resources, and then Robin's going to finish up by reviewing the CCP audit process. And as you know, around April between 6th and 9th, you use the people who are selected for the audit get a letter. So she's going to go through that process so everyone is clear what you will need to submit for CCP. And also today, the purpose of the teleconference is to help you to ensure that you have completed all of the components for CCP before you answer your question on your license renewal process, because there is a question online when you do your license renewal asking you, have you completed all components of CCP? And hopefully through this teleconference, you'll have those resources to be able to complete your licensure requirements through your online licensure process. So what is continuing competency? Well, continuing competency is defined as the ongoing ability of an RN or nurse practitioner to integrate and apply the knowledge, skills, judgment, and personal attributes required to practice safely and ethically in a designated role and setting. So it's providing you with the individual competence to be able to practice in your practice setting. And CCP is maintaining this ongoing ability. Being able to do that involves a continuous process linking the code of ethics to standards of practice and lifelong learning. And the RNNP reflects on his or her or their practice on an ongoing basis and takes action to continually improve that practice. And this is the definition that's outlined by CNA in their resource. The next slide is on the RN regulations. So oftentimes we could ask questions, so how come you're making up these requirements for CCP, or why is ARNNL asking us to do CCP? Well, actually, it's not ARNNL making up those rules. It's actually outlined in legislation, and it's outlined in the RN regulations of 2013. And under Section 17 and Section 12(1)(c) of the Registered Nurses Regulations of 2013, the legislation requires that completion of the CCP program for all RNs and NPs applying for a renewal of a license to practice. And one of the resources on our CCP webpage is the CCP framework. And on page 1, under the preamble, I'd like to read to you the wording. And it says, ARNNL, through the RN regulations, 2013, Section 17, is granted authority such that all members shall complete a continuing competence program as required by the Council. The Council shall conduct regular audits of the members' participation in the CCP program, and members shall provide all information requested in the conduct of the audit. So at any time, if you need to know what your CCP requirements are, then refer to the CCP framework that's on our website under continuing competence. So when you go into the website on the right-hand side, click on the red tab that says continuing competence, and the CCP framework is there for your reference. And so each and every RN and NP applying for a license renewal to practice in Newfoundland must meet the mandatory CCP requirements for the preceding licensure year. So for example, when you go in to do your license renewal today or tomorrow, you're going to be asked a question, have you completed CCP for the preceding year? So that time frame is asking you, have you completed CCP from April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019? And you ask, well, what do you mean by if today is January 29th and you're asking me, do I have CCP done in that time period? And I'll explain that a little bit further. But if you're going to do your license renewal, then it is required that you have your CCP components completed, or there's a process if you do not, and we'll explain that as we go along. Also, one of the requirements is that if RNs or NPs have been on extended leave, and we get questions all the time about, well, I'm on mat leave, I'm on sick leave, or I'm on disability, do I have to do CCP while I'm off? And the answer is yes. If you hold a non-practicing license and you're planning to come back and obtain a practicing license, then you are required to meet the CCP requirements for the preceding licensure year. So, for example, if I'm off, I went off on mat leave sometime in 2018, and you're coming back to work at this time of the year, you're going to be asked, when you apply to change your non-practicing membership to a practicing license, did you complete CCP for the preceding year? And that would have been a requirement. So to continue on about lapsed members, and sometimes, if we're off for a very long time, or we choose to step away from the profession and we become a lapsed member, and you're seeking relicensure with ARNNL, then you're also required to meet CCP requirements if you're seeking relicensure. So you will need to do CCP. Lapsed members who have successfully completed CCP requirements in another province or territory or country for the licensure year immediately preceding the year in which he or she is seeking an RN or NP license will be considered to be successfully completed CCP for all that licensure year. So I'm going to give you an example. So you have been away from Newfoundland for 3 years, but you've been in Nova Scotia practicing, and as part of right across Canada, in every jurisdiction is a requirement to have CCP completed if you have a practicing license. So if you've had a practicing license in Nova Scotia and you come back to renew your license in Newfoundland, then you would not have to complete your CCP because you have a practicing license in Nova Scotia. But if you have any questions on the requirements, please connect with the registration desk at 753-6040 and speak to one of the girls on registration who can certainly help you with this process. So RNs and NPs seeking initial registration and licensure, and you have successfully completed CCP requirements in another province or a country for the licensure year immediately preceding the year in which he or she is seeking an RN or NP license, will be considered to have successfully completed CCP requirement for that licensure year. They are not required to meet ARNNL CCP requirements, but they would be required to meet ARNNL CCP requirements upon licensure renewal. So it just means that if you're coming to Newfoundland and you've never been licensed in Newfoundland, but again, you have a practicing license in another province or country or territory, then you don't have to complete CCP before you apply for that licensure, that license in Newfoundland. But then when you go to renew your license for the next year, you will have to admit CCP during that year that you got your license. So if you have any questions, we'll certainly answer questions at the end of the presentation. So some more CCP requirements under regulations is that NPs and RNs are required to keep all CCP documentation for a 2-year period. And if you're anything like me, I have my papers going back to 2010, but that's certainly not a requirement. The only requirement is that you keep them for 2 years as part of the audit process, but also part of PCR. If there's any issues with competence, then you may need to provide documentation for a 2-year period. So very important that you keep those and that we receive only photocopies of your CCP documents should you be chosen to participate in the audit. And new graduate nurses seeking initial registration licensure with ARNNL are not required to meet ARNNL CCP requirements. However, they are required to meet CCP requirements upon licensure renewal. So what this means is in this spring, when they graduate with new grads from, for example, from Memorial, when they have an interim license and then write their NCLEX and get their practicing license, we do not ask them at that time to do CCP. If they are not successful until, for example, October to get a job in Newfoundland, then when they go to renew their license for 2019-2020, they would have expected to have done CCP from October when they got a job to March 31st. So that's all that means. And when you first get your license after being a new grad, you've done 5 years of continuing education, so we do not ask them to do CCP, but we also know that completing the CCP program and having education on the program is part of their curriculum. So what happens if you fail to complete the program? So RNs and NPs who fail to complete the CCP program will see an impact on his or her licensure. So basically what that means is that an RN and an NP will, when they're renewing their license, but they will renew their license, they will get a practicing license, but it's with conditions. And they're provided 90 days or by the last day of the licensure year, the license was issued to complete the program and to submit documentation confirming completion of all program components. So basically what that means is that when you're going in to either apply for a license or to renew your license, if you have not completed your CCP documents, and that means having all the learning done, having all the documents completed, having all your evaluation completed of your learning, and having verification of your 7 formal hours. All of that needs to be completed. If you do not have that completed, you should answer honestly and say no. There's a professional expectation that you answer it appropriately. And then you're given 90 days to complete your forms. So there's no impact. You can work. You will on the member, if someone went in to search your name under member search, you would see that you have a conditional license, meaning that you have a practicing license, but you have a condition on your license saying you need to complete CCP in 90 days. And then part of those CCP requirements is that you've completed your self-assessment, your learning plan, your evaluation, and your 14 continuous hours. The impact occurs if an RN and an NP fails to complete and submit confirmation of program completion within that 90-day framework, or by the last day of the licensure year the license was issued. So what happens is, if you were given 90 days and you fail to confirm to ARNNL that you completed all those requirements, then your license will be turned into a non-practicing membership, your licensure status, and you would not be permitted to practice nursing, and nor would you be able to use the title of RN and NP until such time as he or she or they provide the requested documentation confirming the CCP program as completed. And basically what that means is that at the end of that 90 days, your practicing license would be changed to a non-practicing member, and your employer would be notified, and you would not be able to work or use the title of RN. So really important. This is not meant to be punitive, but these are legislative requirements, and we do give you lots of time to complete the program, and also we provide resources ourselves. We have CCP resources, and also you can call a consultant to discuss how do you complete those CCP program components if you're unsure. So as I said, the member search will be updated to reflect the status change to a non-practicing membership, and your employer will be notified. But there's ample time to complete your CCP in those 90 days. So some CCP licensure renewal requirements for RNs. So RNs are required to complete and document a self-assessment using the 2013 ARNNL Standards of Practice for Registered Nurses. And I will highlight the requirements for nurse practitioners on the next slide. So basically, and I ask this question when I go into member education, when you're doing your self-assessment, what are you reflecting on? And if you haven't been aware, it is actually the standards of practice. So when you look at your self-assessment form, those are the 4 standards that we have as registered nurses, and the questions that you're asked are the indicators under each of those standards. And then in your CCP program, the RN is expected to identify at least one standard or indicator to be strengthened over the upcoming licensure year. So you choose a standard, for example, Standard 1, the RN adheres to relevant legislation, standards, and employer policy. So that's the standard and indicator that you've chosen, Standard 1, 1.2. And then you develop and document a learning plan for the RN standard and indicator. And then you need to evaluate and document the effects of the learning completed over the licensure year. And really key to note here is that some of the learning completed must relate back to the learning goal. So we're saying that at least one learning activity has to relate back to the learning goal, but not all of the learning has to relate to the learning goal. And we'll talk about that in a little bit further in coming slides. RNs are expected to participate in a minimum of 14 continuous learning hours in the previous licensure year. So again, for this year, we're asking, did you complete 14 continuous learning hours in April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019? And 1/2 of the 14 hours must be activities that are categorized as formal continuous learning activities, which is found in Appendix B of your CCP framework, and that's found on page 7 of the CCP framework. There's examples of formal learning and self-directed learning. And the RN is expected to maintain documentation of verification of formal hours. So you are expected to use your CCP tracking form, your verification form. You can attach certificates to that form. So if you attend a session and you were given a certificate by the organization that provided that certificate, you don't just submit the certificate, you attach the certificate to a verification form and you fill out the verification form. It does not need to be signed because it's been signed by that organization. If you have attendance records, if you're attending committee meetings, those agendas would need to be submitted attached to a verification form. So you must maintain documentation of your verification of your formal hours. And just another note here is that it is not the responsibility of your clinical educator or your manager to keep record of your hours. Under your standard 1.4, the RN assumes primary responsibility of their continuing competence program. It is important that you maintain your documentation of your program. Now we're moving on to the requirements for the MP. And the only difference is that the MPs are required to complete and document a self-assessment and identify at least 2 MP standards and indicators to be strengthened over the coming year. So as an RN only has to choose 1 standard indicator, an MP has to choose 2. So they can do 2 indicators under the same standard, or they can do a indicator under 2 standards. It's completely up to them. So the same applies, and I'm not going to go into all of that on that slide because the only difference is that MPs had to identify 2 standards indicators. So now the next slide shows the self-assessment form. So just some tips for completing this. As you see, your self-assessment, the initial form of the toolkit identifies your name, your ARNNL number, and I hope you all remember your ARNNL registration number, 15479, and the date initiated. I'm going to bring that to your attention. The date initiated is not the day that you started nursing school or you became a practicing member. It is the date in April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019 for this licensure year, when you started your CCP program, when you started that self-assessment and started to develop your plan. That's the date that goes in there. Then it's your years of nursing practice down the next column, and your practice setting and your role. And up on top, there's a blank area for the year. So this, your CCP program date would have been 2018-2019 there. So you're reflecting on your self-assessment, your standards, and you're being asked to rate yourself from novice to expert or not applicable. So also in your self-assessment, you're being asked to identify strengths that you've demonstrated in this standard and areas for professional development in this standard. And hopefully, by those areas for professional development, that may give you a clue as to what possibly could be a learning plan or learning goal for you. So some overall CCP components that are required in the self-assessment is that RNs are required to complete an assessment using their standards. All RNs and NPs are to assess their practice by reflecting on their current role and practice setting. And through a self-assessment, the RN or NP will be able to identify the strengths and areas they would like to strengthen. And all RNs must select at least one ARNNL indicator or standard as the focus of learning, and NPs must select at least 2 NP standards indicators as the focus of learning. Moving on then to your learning plan. So each RN and NP is expected to develop 1 learning plan for an RN, 2 learning plans for an NP, and again, just drawing your attention to the date initiated is when you sit down and do your plan in the licensure year. And also on your learning plan, it's really important that you identify on your form in the learning plan in the toolkit is you're being asked what is your standard number, so what standard from 1 to 4 did you choose, the indicator, which indicator under the standard you choose. You're expected to complete the personal reflection on the standard indicator. So why did you choose that standard indicator? Then you develop a learning goal, and then in the next column, you're looking at learning activities. How am I going to learn this? So you are expected to think about in the coming year, when you sit down sometime around April 1 or after, what activities do you think you can pursue to be able to meet that learning goal? And at least one has to relate back to your learning goal. Then the final column is the target date. And the target date must be within April 1 to March 31st. So in the past preceding licensure year would have been, your target date should have said somewhere between April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019. You can say a date now and ongoing if you figure that may occur, but if just by saying ongoing, that's not sufficient. The target date must be within the licensure year, the preceding licensure year. So we should see dates that say April 1, 2018 to March 31st, 2019. So just some thoughts on developing and implementing your learning plan. The RNNP develops a learning plan for the coming year to strengthen professional performance in regards to the identified standard and indicator. The RNNP's learning plan is carried out during the coming licensure year. So you sit down April 1 sometime, or it could be May, and what are you going to learn in this coming year? The RNNP must ensure that some of their learning relates back to their learning plan. And as the plan is implemented, it will be acknowledged that sometimes unexpected events happen, which may require the NP or RN to rethink their plan. And in these situations, RNs and NPs can rethink, revise, and implement a revised learning plan. And in my own example, in 2015, I started a plan in the practice setting that I was situated as a manager, and then so I developed a plan for that practice setting. But when I was hired by ARNNL and assumed the role of nursing consultant, I actually changed my learning plan to reflect the learning goals that I needed to achieve once I started this new position. So there's no problems with changing or revising your learning plan. Some other thoughts or considerations that you need to keep in mind, because we get asked this question all the time. I go to a conference that's 8 hours. Do I just put down 8 hours? Well, reflect on, are you receiving education during a coffee break and a lunch time? If you're having a lunch session where you're learning during the lunch hour, absolutely. But if you have a complete break during lunch and break, coffee breaks, then we would not count that. So I guess overall what we're trying to say or summarize is that 1 clocked hour of learning is equal to 1 CL continuous learning hour. We also get asked if ARNNL approves an education program. We do not. ARNNL authorization of an activity is not required. If you feel it meets the ability to provide you learning about about nursing that applies to nursing and will meet your goal, then you can certainly use that learning. We don't have to approve it. A continuing education activity which has been repeated during the reporting licensure year may be counted only once as part of the total number of continuous learning hours. So for example, if you do CCP in April, you change positions and you go to another area and you're expected to do BLS, CPR in that area where you've now moved, you would not be able to count BLS again. You can only count it once. And as I said, learning activities must fall within the licensure year, so that's April 1 to March 31st. And each RN and NP is required to gain their own personal records pertaining to their learning plan and their continuous learning hours. The next slide is actually Appendix B from the framework on page 7. And it gives you examples of some of the formal learning hours and some self-directed. So often when we get calls, we will direct members to this page in this framework, and there's actually a link on our website under the CCP program that links directly to this continuous learning activities chart. And you can certainly refer to that when you're deciding, does your learning activity fit in one of these categories? And if you're unsure, you can give one of the 3 consultants a call, myself, Peggy, Raman, or Rolanda Lavalle, to determine if this is formal or self-directed, if you have any doubt. Then we move on to the evaluation form. And really important when doing the evaluation form is that you complete the form in its entirety. You know, some of the auditors, when they do the audit, they're finding that these evaluation forms are not completed in their entirety. So as you'll see in your toolkit, when you look at the evaluation plan, you write down what the learning activity was. So I attended a session on MAID. I completed it on September 25th, 2018. It was 5 hours of formal learning. So I check off formal learning under the continuous learning. I write down it's 5 hours. And then I have to give an explanation how it does apply to my nursing practice, and because of my learning, is there a difference in my nursing practice as demonstrated by? So I have to say how that learning has changed my practice, has made a difference in my nursing practice. So each evaluation form has 3 sections, so you can put 3 learning activities on one form, but if that only equals up to 3 hours, then you're going to need more evaluation forms to complete to add up to 14 hours. But if you have 3 activities that add up to 14 continuous learning hours and 7 of which are formal hours, then you only need the 1 evaluation form. So another point of completing the form in its entirety is that you need to reflect on the bottom the total formal continuous learning hours and the continuous self-directed continuous learning hours. And if you're using one form, there should be at least 7 hours of formal learning, but it can be all formal hours. So you can have 14 formal hours, but there must be some combination of 14 with a minimum of 7 being 7 formal hours, because oftentimes these forms are not completed in their entirety. So as I said, RNs and NPs continuously evaluate the effects of their learning, and the evaluation will focus on how the results of the learning, how their learning apply and impact to their nursing practice to create a positive difference in nursing outcomes of care and service. And the NP and RN must evaluate the learning activity and its impact on their nursing practice. So just some key points to think about when you're completing your evaluation. So now the slide that you would see are these resources. So on our website, under the Continuing Competence Program, right at the very bottom of the web page is continuous learning opportunities. And these opportunities will give you opportunities for both formal and informal self-directed learning. For example, the ARNNL events, these provide both formal and self-directed learning. So the ARNNL teleconference, like today, if you're attending in person through the teleconferencing system, that's formal hours. But once they're archived and recorded and archived and stored under the archived education sessions, and you listen to it online, you know, when you're at home at 12 o'clock at night or you're on a shift and you're listening to it, that when it's archived, that's actually self-directed learning. But in order to get formal hours through these teleconferences, you must register and then complete the evaluation, and you'll get a certificate from ARNNL, or if you have a colleague sitting by you today, you can ask them to sign your verification form. Practice NL, those are 12 or 13 modules that were developed by the Center of Nursing Studies for the bridging and reentry programs for nursing, and they provide formal hours because they do a pre and post test, and they provide you with a certificate. So there's lots of opportunities on this web page to get formal hours, particularly if you're off on sick leave or you know, extended leave, mat leave, and you're unsure of how to get these hours. I also draw your attention to My CNA. You'll see on the right-hand side of the columns there of educational learning opportunities, and this is the new platform that CNA is using for instead of Nurse One. So you can go online there, and there's lots of reading, and there's also courses that you can complete, for example, the 9 modules on the Code of Ethics. So there's lots of opportunities, but if you're unsure, certainly give us a call and we can help you with that. Just one last note on some tips to help you complete these forms. In the Access Journal of September 2017, there's actually a article written on CCP Tips for Success. So if you want some tips on how to ensure that you're completing your forms correctly, that article is there for you to read as well. So my next slide, you'll see, is our document on Continuing Competence Program Framework. So that's our CCP program framework, and it outlines the expectations for completing the CCP program. So if you have any questions, it will tell you what the expectations are for CCP. So certainly have a look at that, and that's on our webpage again under CCP. I just want to alert you to the fact that ARNNL is currently undergoing an evaluation of our CCP program. There was focus groups and a survey that was distributed and conducted by Ms. Patricia Granger, who's a nursing educator, and she is undertaking the evaluation. And to date, we have had over 1,000 responses, so thank you to all the members who participated in that evaluation. And we hope to see a revised program over the next year and a half or so, and there'll be education possibly in the winter of 2020 or spring of 2020, but no worries yet. You are currently on the same program and required to complete that, but just to let you know that we are looking to revise our CCP program based on your feedback. So now I'm going to turn it over to Robin Williamson, who has assumed responsibility for the CCP audit, and she's going to lead you through the CCP audit requirements.
Well, thank you, Michelle. So there is a section of the RN regulations that speak to the need to conduct an audit of the CCP program. So that's section 17, subsections 2 and 3. Of the Registered Nurses Regulations, which state that the Council shall conduct regular audits of the members' participation in the Continuing Competency Program, and that members shall provide all information requested in conduct of the audit. So now I'm going to take a couple of minutes to review what the 2019 CCP audit will look like, and this information is available on the ARNNL website under the Continuing Competence tab. So if you are selected for the audit, Under the legislation, you are required to submit the requested documents you completed for the 2018-2019 licensure year. And as Michelle pointed out, this includes the time frame from April 1st, 2018 to March 31st of 2019. So shortly after the end of renewal, which is March 31st, our research and policy officer will use a computerized process where a random sample of RNs and NPs who've been issued a practicing license will be selected to participate in the audit. So the random sample ensures that there's RNs and NPs from a variety of practice settings chosen to participate in the audit, and this includes acute care, community, long-term care, education, administration, and also RNs or NPs who are self-employed. So for this year's audit, 300 practicing members will be selected, and these members will be required to submit their forms to the audit committee for review. So there was actually a call for auditors sent out in our most recent edition of Access Magazine, which went out earlier this month, and you can submit your name to volunteer to become an auditor. So then around the first week of April, ARNNL will notify 300 practicing members that they've been selected to participate in the CCP audit and that they are required to submit their forms, including their learning plan, evaluation form, and tracking forms of 7 formal continuous learning hours. And as Michelle had already explained, on your evaluation form, you have to show you've completed a total of 14 continuous learning hours, with a minimum of 7 of those hours being from formal learning. So forms are to be submitted by May the 1st. Given this is a legislative requirement, there are no exemptions or extensions to submitting the required forms. So the first week of April, you'll receive a letter via registered mail indicating you've been chosen for the audit and that you are required to submit your CCP forms. You'll also receive an email a couple of days after you've been sent your letter stating you've been chosen for the audit. So just to let you know, the email that you provide in My ARNNL, which is where you complete your licensure renewal, that will be the email where we will send all of our CCP correspondence. So please ensure that that's your current email address and one that you check regularly, because like I've said, there are no exemptions or extensions for the audit. There will also be a reminder email sent about 7 to 10 days after the initial notification, just reminding you to submit your documents if you haven't already done that. So then on May 23rd, the audit will take place at ARNNL House, where our auditors will review the CCP documents that are submitted. The documents are de-identified, so auditors won't know the names of the members who were selected to participate. The auditors will use a checklist to determine if the member has met the requirements of CCP, and once the audit is complete, each member will be notified of their results. So they'll either get a congratulatory letter stating they have met all requirements of the CCP audit, or they will receive a letter stating they have not met all requirements of the CCP audit, and follow-up with ARNNL may be required to discuss the portions that they did not meet. So for example, they may have to submit verification of additional learning hours, or they may have to clarify how their learning relates back to their learning goals. So the letter they receive will state specifically what was not met and encourage them to follow up with ARNNL for any clarification. So these letters are usually sent out before the end of June, and we provide a time frame where they may have to submit further information in order to meet the requirements of CCP. So just a glimpse of last year's results. 92.4% of all audited members did meet initial audit requirements, which is actually an increase of 6.4% from the previous year, which is great. Only 7.6% failed to meet the requirements and required follow-up with ARNNL to get clarification or resubmit incomplete or missing documentation, and to receive further education on the CCP requirements. So once that initial follow-up was completed, 99.6% of audited members met the CCP audit requirements for that year, and only 1 member remained unmet and had their file referred to the Director of Regulatory Services for follow-up. So those are the components of the CCP audit process. Again, this information is available on our website under the Continuing Competence tab. So now I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Okay. So the last slide that I have there is our contact information. So as I said, Robin is a regulatory officer with regulatory services, and she's responsible for the audit. And if you have any questions about the audit, particularly if you get selected in April, then the information is there online and on the slide for you to contact, and it will also be in the audit letter. If you have a question about the continuing competence program and how to complete the forms, then my contact information is there. But just to inform you that while I may be the lead for CCP, the other two consultants, Peggy Rahman and Rolanda LaValle, can answer any questions about CCP, and Robin can as well. You know, if we're not here on a particular day, then you can pick up the phone and call one of the practice consultants or Robin to lead you through that.